Owen Jones. Owen Jones. Owen Jones is a writer, a broadcaster. He does all sorts of things, Owen, for the movement. But most importantly, he stands up and fights on behalf of his class. That's our people.
Blimey, it's been a quiet year, hasn't it? Firstly, bear with me. I've had a traumatising day. I was casually minding my own business, behaving myself, and Lord Mandelson jumped at me and tried to hug me and have. Thankfully, I ran before anyone could take a photograph. But I believe the Shadow Chancellor wasn't quite so lucky. So it's been a long day for him, more than perhaps you could even have imagined. Look, this year, let's just take stock about what's happened. The biggest against all odds victory in the history of British politics. And it didn't just happen out of nowhere. It happened because every single person in this room and outside this room, hundreds of thousands of people made it happen. It was a victory of the movement of grassroots politics against machine politics. And we should be so proud of what we achieved, because it showed that the implausible, what seems the impossible, can become the actual practical reality. And that's what we've seen in this few weeks. And it's been an emotional roller coaster, I think, not just for people on this panel, but people in this room. And I have to say, before we just talk about what we're up against and what we've seen today, the future of this party could not look brighter when we have members of Parliament, like Kat sitting next to me today, like the MPs, like, where's Richard gone? Has he gone? I was going to get people to cheer. Richard, Burgon, and of course the other MPs standing proudly, defiantly as representatives of the Labour movement, who will stand up for working people and those who do not have a voice. But friends, we've got to realise what we're facing. And what we saw today from John McDonnell was quite a speech. Because what we saw, thank goodness, finally, a shadow chancellor prepared to take on Tory myths on the economy, not to capitulate to those Tory myths. And instead of allowing a disastrous, conservative economic record to be portrayed as a success, to show it as the absolute colossal failure that conservative economic record is. They said they'd wipe out the deficit in one parliament. They didn't even get through half. They said that they'd pay off the debts. They added more debts than every single Labour government put together in history. They said they'd give us this great economic growth, the weakest economic growth since the 19th century, the longest fall in the living standards of working people since Queen Victoria sat on the throne in the 19th century, a crisis of productivity so profound that if French workers took off every Friday, France would still have higher productivity than this country. On every single measure, the economic record of the Tories is a disaster, and finally this party is saying what a disaster it actually is. But we're not just doing that. But here's what's changed. But that's the thing. People like myself were arch critics of much of what Blair and Brown did. Perverse then. How perverse? That it was people like myself, people on this panel, people here in the audience, who had to take on the myth that Labour's spending on schools and hospitals and nurses and teachers caused a crash by the bankers in Wall Street and in the City of London. Spending that the Conservatives backed pound for pound will no longer are the Tories going to get away with revising history, with turning colossal failures that they had presided over into success. But it's not just that. This is what's changed as well. As well as actually taking on the economic record, we're actually not just going to be against something, we're going to be for something. And that's what was so often missing. Because the way we get change, and Tony Benn always said this, is the burning flame of anger at injustice and the burning flame of hope at a better world. But now we've got both. We've got hope again. And we saw today, and John McDonnell's speech was an inspiring speech. A speech of a shadow chancellor who towered above his opponents. And the stature of Jeremy and John grows by the day. But look at what they're talking about. He made austerity real. And you know what? I've often been cynical about using that word austerity. During the election campaign, one of the most commonly Googled phrases was, "What is austerity?" After years of cuts and attacks to the welfare state and so on. And often we end up sometimes using words which we all understand, but the people we're trying to convince and persuade don't understand. And our opponents don't make the same mistake. When they talk about cutting the deficit and all the rest of it, they talk about how the economy is like a household budget. It's an economic nonsense, it's economic illiteracy, but it's an attempt to use the language of common sense and relate to people in an everyday sort of way, and sometimes we fail. But John didn't do that today. How did he start his speech? He made it real. He made it about people. He made it about disabled people having their basic support taken away. We live in this society which attacks disabled people, and if the basic test of how a society is civilised is how we treat our most sick and disabled people, my goodness, how this country fails. But this is the thing, he made it real, not just about disabled people, but about the cuts in support to supermarket workers and cleaners. A government that now tells the children of families that if you have 2 siblings rather than 1, then we will take your support away. That we will leave your bellies emptier, that we will leave your homes colder, that we will leave your parents more stressed about bills they are less able to pay. That it's about cuts to these services that the people of this country depend on, that our ancestors fought for at such cost and at such sacrifice. And that's what we're going to do from now on. We're not going to talk all the time about words like austerity, which seem too abstract, and facts and statistics. We're going to talk about the real consequences for people across this country. We're going to have a genuine alternative now. Yes, we'll have cuts, but not cuts to social security, cuts to the corporate welfare, to those people at the top of society who are leeching off the state. The real scourges in society. That instead of the big accountancy firms being seconded to the Treasury to draw up the tax laws, then tell their clients how to avoid the laws they themselves have written, we will kick out those vested interests and make the people at the top of society pay the taxes they are supposed to pay. Go to the coffee shops, the small coffee shops here in Brighton. They have to pay their taxes. So why don't Starbucks and Amazon pay their taxes as well? That's what we'll do. An industrial strategy backed up by publicly owned investment banks to create the renewable energy jobs of the future, to take on not just the jobs crisis but the environmental crisis too, nicking the radical extreme proposals of the right-wing government of Germany under Angela Merkel. Yes, that's how radical we're going to be, but we're going to create those jobs, skilled jobs for young people with dignity and security. That instead of cutting housing benefit, we will reduce spending on housing benefit, which is subsidising private landlords, not lining the pockets of tenants, by building homes, providing skilled jobs for young people, bringing down the social housing waiting list, and getting the economy going. A living wage which reduces spending on in-work benefits as well, and yes, trade union rights, so the wealth created by the real wealth creators, working people, the people who keep this country ticking, they get the slice of the wealth they create. That self-employed people have their tax credits protected and have social security protection like pensions and paid sick leave that they are denied, which they should have as a basic right. Now friends, to wrap up, this is what we have to remember. We're up against it now. That against all odds victory, and it seemed at one point that an asteroid hitting the Earth was a more likely proposition than Jeremy Corbyn becoming leader of the Labour Party. But that was the easy bit. And they are going to throw everything at this movement. And it is now a movement, a grassroots bottom-up movement, a democratic movement, and that's the point. It's not just about Jeremy Corbyn. He's a leader, but we've all got to be leaders now. We've all got to show leadership. We've all got to build this bottom-up grassroots movement that can inspire people across this country who want one thing more than anything else, and that's hope. The idea that politics can transform their lives, their families' lives, and the community and the country in which they live. Every single one of us has a role to play. Not just to vote for Jeremy Corbyn, not just to turn up to rallies and organise and attack what we're facing and give each other a bit of hope, but we go out there, all of us, at the end of this conference as the beginning, the launch pad for the biggest progressive movement this country has ever seen, to rebuild this country, to give us a different sort of economy, not a society run as a racket for the tiny group at the top, the mean and the greedy, but a society run in the interests of working people. That's the prize. That's what we've all got to do. Let's go out there full of hope, full of optimism, organise our communities and change this country forever. Thank you.